So the sixth chord in any major key is going to be known as the relative minor. And I want to get into this for a number of reasons, because it's a great tool to have in your arsenal as a songwriter. So let's say you have a verse that's built on 1-4-5. So you have, in this case, you have C, F, and G. Everything's sounding happy, everything's sounding nice. But if you were to repeat those same chords for the chorus, unless you have a really, really, really good melody for both that is very unique and stands out, that can make that chord progression sound compelling when repeated, it's probably gonna sound pretty boring. So to me at least, I go to anything that creates some kind of sense of contrast. And the best way to start with that for me, as far as a go-to sense, would be to base a different section of the song on the relative minor. So for example, if you had a chorus that was based around the A minor chord, right? And even if that was the only different chord that you had there, so you just swapped out the C major chord for an A minor, it's gonna sound drastically different, okay? It's no longer going to be happy sounding. It's gonna have kind of like a yearning, kind of sad quality about it. But the key thing is that it's creating contrast. It's very different and separates itself from that very, safe verse, if you will. So let's break down what the relative minor actually is. Using C major as an example, building our C major chord, the notes are as follows. So we start with the root note C, we skip D to find our first third, which would be E. From E, we skip F to find G. So we have the notes C, E, and G. That's what makes up our C major chord. So what's interesting is when we spell our A minor chord, it looks like this. So we start with the root note of A, we skip B to find C. So there's our third. From C, we skip D to find E. So we have the notes A, C, and E. So remember, the C major chord had the notes C, E, and G. So the only difference is that one little note, A and G, right? So that's why it's relative. These chords are relative to each other. So you have a relative major and a relative minor. So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, if we're in the key of C and we're playing a scale, that means that all of our C major scales will sound good in the key of C, and all of our A minor scales are gonna sound good in the key of C major, because they are made up of the exact same notes, okay? Let's go even further than that though, because I want to explain how the relative minor is actually a minor scale that's living inside your major scale. So if we take a look, once again, at C major, we have C, whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A, whole step to B, and then half step once again bringing us back to C. As I mentioned before, the relative minor is a minor scale living inside the major scale. So what that means is we're actually going to start on the sixth note of the major scale and then build our scale using all the notes in the C major scale. I know this is sounding a little complicated, but bear with me. In other words, we have A, and then we have a whole step to B, half step to C, whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, and then whole step to A. So the pattern of whole steps and half steps actually change. In this case, it's whole, half, whole, half, whole, instead of the major scale, which is made up of the whole, half, whole, half, right? You're starting from a different point in the scale and you're using the same bundle of notes here. No notes are changed in this relative minor scale at all. And that's what makes it relative. It's made of the same stuff, but it's kind of starting from a different perspective. And now we're kind of getting into the territory of modes, which I will save for another conversation, but hopefully this makes sense to you. So not only are the chords relative to each other, but the scales are relative to each other because they're made up of the same notes. So once again, to break that down, a C major chord is made up of the notes C, E, and G. An A minor chord is going to be made up of the notes A, C, and E. Both chords share C and E, right? The only different chord is going to be that A and that G. So, relative. Now, let's hear how that sounds in a chord progression.